All right, everyone, it's fun to watch people that are kind of black-pilled as well as, liberals who try to start shit, try to pretend that Trump is warmongering after Iran, after his comments. Actually, he's pretty much done the opposite. Only if you artificially limit, again, propaganda tactic, what people are seeing from what he said, could you get the sense that he actually is taking up a pro-war stance. Now, I would say again, firstly, I don't support any particular action against Iran. I have no problem with the nation of Iran or its people. There is definitely sponsorship of militants from Iran, although it's hypocritical when the U.S. focuses on that and ignores the fact that the Saudis do the same. Some of these other states, Israel certainly within the region, has militants that it sponsors. They get some help from Egypt. Lebanon, certainly. I think, is it Lebanon or Jordan that the U.S. perpetually pays off to try to maintain a somewhat secular government? I think it's the nation of Lebanon. I think that they would have fallen, if I remember, to Hezbollah by now if it weren't for U.S. intervention on a perpetual level. Could be getting the nation wrong. There's a lot of crazy shit that goes on. Turkey now has, of course, its own problems with regards to this. That being said, though, what Trump actually is saying about Iran, if you listen to what he actually said, I mean the full statement, most of it is, hey, I don't want to go to war. War is bad for people, kills people, destroys economies. It's pretty much pointless. And then, as an afterthought almost, he throws in, by the way, it would destroy Iran, so, don't threaten us again. What he's doing is posturing. This is normal. This is par for the course. It's nice to have somebody in the White House who's actually willing to respond in kind when this sort of threat is made, because it wasn't the U.S. making the initial threat, it was Iran. This is the game that you have to play. Trump understands that because he's from a corporate boardroom cutthroat environment. People like the gentle-handed academia-style politicians like Obama, they don't get it. People like George W., sort of dynastic, I know, also in corporate boardroom, but ultimately a dynastic politician more than anything else. They don't quite understand it. The last time I think really that we had a president that understood foreign policy on a rudimentary level is Herbert Walker Bush. And that's hilarious because look at what a failure he ended up being. Trump has done very, very well, all things considered. He's the first president since Reagan that sort of had a coherent foreign policy. Think what you will about Reagan's own warmongering and weird statements. A lot of it was posturing. Saying, yeah, we're going to put nukes in space, we're going to have a space force. Trump is basically taking Ronald Reagan and repackaging him. People don't even fucking understand what he's doing. Why do you think he constantly talks about wanting to send a moon mission and have a space force and stuff like that and modernize the nukes? And it's playing the grand chessboard. He's hanging out with Kissinger and all these people. Didn't cause a nuclear war before. Actually, it backed down the Eastern world and ended up partially healing the world's divide for a while there. Trump's doing exactly what he needs to do. Trust me, it's not just Trump making his own decisions as well. He's got plenty of advisors that he's listening to. One of the main problems, indeed, for U.S. foreign policy has always been, over the last few decades, Iran. Now, you can't blame the Iranians for having a stick up their ass at some point about Uncle Sam, considering the fact that we helped Saddam Hussein deploy chemical weapons against their troops a couple times. That was declassified not that many years ago. The Pentagon had actively given direction to them and told them sort of where to drop the warheads. Did you know that? Probably not. Or the fact that we overthrew their government, tried to do it a second time. Oh, look what we did in Iraq. We did basically the same thing. The U.S. meddled in Middle Eastern affairs habitually for, the better part of the last 70 years. And it's a post-World War II facet. What I've said is what happened is the U.S. realized after the Second World War, the Great War experience, when the autopsy of everything that had happened occurred. What was realized is that who controlled the energy controlled the world. Who controlled the high seas controlled the world. The Eastern Bloc didn't quite get this. They focused on mass manpower, lots of armor on the ground, like infantry, tanks, and things like that, aeronautics, and developing, bigger nukes. It's like if you look at the two strategies, especially through the 50s through the 80s, between the United States and its sphere, the Soviets and their sphere. All you have to do is look at their nuclear weapons to understand the basic premise, or preparatory strategies for dealing with radioactivity and being nuked. if you look at the preparation made, the U.S. expands the suburbs, gets as many people as possible into lower density zones outside of inner city centers. Therefore, you need more nukes per city, therefore putting stress on the Soviets. Now, it was marketed, the suburbs at the time were marketed as, hey, get out of the city with all the smog, you'll still be close enough to work, but you'll have your little lawn and stuff. And keep it nicely manicured and stuff to prevent fire from spreading, to prevent firestorms, which happen after you drop nuclear weapons if things are very compact. Clean up your trash. Make sure your house is a light, cute color and stuff. Prefab in many cases. Everything was good. The fact that they start iodizing everything, putting chemicals in all the food. The fact that they started using preservatives on everything was primarily so that there'd be food left over for people to salvage for the first year or so after a nuclear war. It wasn't because, oh yeah, it tastes better if we pump everything full of these chemicals. You look at the Soviet world, things are different. They still compact people. In fact, they hyper-concentrate them into commie block sort of situations and then just build a bunch of bunkers. If you look at the nuclear weapons that were created, the U.S. focused on a smaller number of smaller but ultimately very accurate systems. Plenty of those. We're talking 1 megaton and even smaller weapons. The Soviets focus on that. They built the Tsar Bomba. Originally, they wanted to make it 100 megatons. That's the sort of shit that they were developing. Look at the Satan missile and its capabilities and how many megatons of blast it will release. Pretty imposing. But yeah, it's amusing to watch people that don't understand that we're still in the Cold War, that this isn't really about Iran. It's an extension of the fight against ostensibly Russia and China at this point. More China economically. It's really an attempt to maintain U.S. hegemony over the world's economic situation. Hell, our military posturing ultimately isn't. You don't build aircraft carriers because you just want to float them on your shoreline. It's like, this is why the EU isn't the military power of the world. You know how much it costs to build and maintain that many carriers? We've got more than the rest of the world combined, I believe. The Italy, I think, is in number 3 now. They got 2 aircraft carriers. Aren't they building a 3rd? Italy rules the Mediterranean, that's for sure. No problem there. No, the United States has those to enforce its trade policies more than anything. To maintain, basically the world order. The New World Order is just U.S. hegemony. That's all that means. By the way, not a bad thing. Herbert Walker and Bill Clinton both saying that. People thought it was reptile people or something. We've got to understand, though, that I don't think there's going to be a war with Iran. It would bring us into direct conflict with Russia. But if you're threatened by one of these states, you have to respond in kind. Obama's response was always, here's a red line, don't cross it. The person's like, well, you're not going to do shit, so they cross the red line. The problem is when you build your policy out of that sort of posturing, you have to be willing to back it up. Trump's not posturing. He's not saying there's a red line. He's just saying don't threaten us. It's a vague threat that he's making back at them. It's not warmongering. He's saying he doesn't want war. I genuinely believe that too, if only for politically pragmatic reasons. A war breaking out with Iran right now would be disastrous for his presidency. Even though the U.S. would ultimately prevail, unless the nuclear conflict began, it's not worth it. People don't have the stomach for another Middle Eastern adventure or Venezuelan invasion or anything. Some of his highest foreign policy approval is when he was shaking hands with Kim Jong-un. He needs to focus on that as well. He should be more conciliatory towards the Iranians. I understand that pisses off Republicans because they're Israel, basically. At some point, though, U.S. policy in that region is going to need to shift a little bit. It's one thing to control energy or whatever, rare earth minerals and raw materials the world over. It's one thing to be asserting your hegemony over them, but when it involves actual combat with Russia's main ally within the Middle East, I don't think that would work very well. That's about all. Peace out.